You've probably seen countless historical images and films featuring burning Sherman tanks, and you've absorbed many myths about them over the years. But today, we're going to peel back the layers and reveal the chilling reality for tank crews whose Shermans faced enemy fire, exposing a truth far more gruesome than you might ever imagine. To fully grasp the horrors endured by Sherman crews, we first need to delve into the very origins and underlying philosophy that birthed this iconic tank. A design immediately thrust into the crucible of war. After the devastation of World War I, American tank development largely stagnated, with little innovation in modern armored warfare. By 1939, the U.S. Army's most advanced vehicles were a mere 400 light tanks, categorized as combat cars, and still tied to cavalry units rather than being true tanks. These were primarily M2 series, thinly armored, awkwardly tall, and utterly ill-equipped to face the advanced armored vehicles being developed by other nations. Meanwhile, these other nations were meticulously refining their armored doctrines. Germany, for instance, pursued the exact opposite path to America, and their foresight paid dividends when the war exploded. Their blitzkrieg tactics, spearheaded by formidable tanks, proved devastatingly effective. By the time the U.S. decided to fully commit to the war in North Africa, the conflict had already raged there for some time. America's hurried response was the peculiar M3 Lee. Its odd design was a consequence of technological limitations. They simply couldn't mount a powerful tank gun in a fully rotating turret. The solution: a 75mm gun fixed in a side casemate, complemented by an already obsolete 37mm gun in a small, upper turret. These M3 Lees were rushed to North Africa, essentially acting as stopgaps to buy precious time for a truly effective tank to be developed. This urgent need led to the birth of the M4 Sherman. Developed at breakneck speed in 1941, the Sherman borrowed the reliable chassis and drivetrain from its M3 Lee predecessor, while featuring a new, all-welded hull. Early riveted armor had a terrifying flaw: even non-penetrating hits could send hypersonic shrapnel flying inside the tank. Sadly, many crews learned this brutal lesson firsthand. Initially, the Sherman's 75mm main gun was considered sufficiently powerful, designed primarily for infantry support with its high explosive rounds. It was also expected to hold its own against enemy tanks. However, as history now confirms, tank-on-tank combat was not the Sherman's forte. Yet, even this wasn't the biggest challenge awaiting its confident crews, who were eagerly shipped with their new machines to Africa. There, they would face the formidable German panzer divisions, led by the brilliant tactician General Rommel, the Desert Fox, and armed with the terrifying 8 and anti-aircraft guns repurposed as devastating tank killers. The very first Shermans to see action were actually operated by British forces. They arrived just in time to mitigate catastrophic losses and played a crucial role in the Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942. Around 250 brand new Shermans, sporting fresh desert camouflage, reached Egypt precisely for the invasion. The British lauded the Sherman's reliability. For them, it was a near miracle to turn the engine off at night and have it reliably start again in the morning, a luxury their Crusader and cruiser tanks rarely afforded. The 75mm gun was a significant improvement over their previous 50 numbers in light tank armament, capable of destroying Panzerbussers and IVs until the Germans bolstered their frontal armor. Shermans also boasted improved protection, though they were far from impenetrable. Within weeks of the battle, the British were demanding more. However, some aspects were less appreciated, such as the Sherman's notorious tendency to brew up, ignite rapidly after a hit, a widely known issue. Furthermore, its armor struggled against anything larger than smaller caliber anti-tank weapons, a point we'll elaborate on shortly. With the British giving the Sherman their approval, attention turned to American crews. They landed in North Africa in late 1942 with a mix of older M3 Lees and new M4 Shermans, and their experience would starkly contrast that of the seasoned British. The American crews were green, lacking combat experience, and they would pay a heavy price, literally in blood, to learn their lessons. At Kasserine Pass, the inexperienced U.S. forces engaged the Germans in their first serious confrontation. Relying on their new Shermans and failing to adapt to German tactics, They were decimated by anti-tank guns and outmaneuvered panzers that shattered their formations. Nevertheless, the survivors absorbed these harsh lessons, returning better prepared for future battles. By then, both British and American forces had enough wrecked Shermans to analyze the aftermath for their crews, and the findings were horrifying. The most glaring and persistently debated issue among tank enthusiasts was the Sherman's propensity to brew up or burst into flames after a single hit. For those unfamiliar, this wasn't due to the gasoline engine. The real culprit was the ammunition, specifically, its storage. Early Shermans stowed shells for the main gun in exposed racks throughout the tank, with many placed in the side sponsons of the hull, as is shown in the image. These shells were not only vulnerable to ignition from any hot or fiery projectile penetrating the armor, but they were also situated in the most probable areas to be hit, whether from the sides or the front. Regardless of the angle, a direct hit to these bunched-up ammo stores in the tank's center was highly likely. Initial attempts to mitigate this involved welding extra armor plates over these vulnerable sections, but this proved largely ineffective. Countless crews met tragic ends, suffering severe injuries or perishing as their ammunition exploded, while they desperately tried to escape the burning tank. This catastrophic flaw earned the Sherman grim nicknames like Tommy Cooker. Moreover, while designed to carry about 97 shells, crews frequently crammed in up to 140 rounds, fearing they would run out of ammo in battle. The critical solution came with the introduction of wet stowage. This innovative system featured metal walls enclosing the ammunition, filled with a water glycol mixture. In theory, if the armor was penetrated, this fluid would extinguish any fire, or at least buy enough time for the crew to escape. This dramatically reduced the chance of a Sherman igniting after a hit from 70–80% down to 10–15%. However, some argue that the relocation of ammo from the vulnerable side sponsons to the more protected hull floor was an equally, if not more, crucial factor. Regardless, this improvement was a welcome relief for the crews. Tragically, wet stowage came too late for the many who perished in the burning tanks of 1942 and 1943. Another deeply unsettling aspect, upon reflection, was the design of early Sherman hatches. The driver and assistant driver had narrow, rectangular hatches above them, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. But the situation was even worse for the gunner, and especially the loader in the turret. Early Shermans had only a single two-piece hatch for all three turret crew members. Imagine the nightmare: a tank is hit, filling rapidly with smoke and flames. Three crewmen, if not instantly killed, must now desperately clamber through one small, shared exit. A veteran Sherman loader once recounted his horrific experience. His tank was struck, instantly killing the gunner and commander, who slumped over each other. As the tank filled with smoke and fire, he struggled to separate their entangled bodies to reach the hatch, but he couldn't. After moments of unbearable agony, he glimpsed a faint light from the driver's hatch. Fortunately, the turret had traversed to a position that allowed him access to the driver's opening, which was already ajar as the driver had long since fled. He managed to escape through that narrow opening. The sheer terror of that moment is enough to send shivers down your spine. By 1944, larger oval hatches, often spring-assisted for easier opening, were implemented. Crucially, the loader finally received his own dedicated hatch, offering a slight reprieve in his already perilous role. The Sherman was also equipped with internal fire suppression systems, including automatic extinguishers for the engine compartment and handheld CO2 units for the crew. Yet, in the heat of battle, when smoke and sparks filled the interior, the most viable option remained rapid evacuation. Crews drilled these escape procedures relentlessly, learning by touch to navigate the hatches, aiming for automatic and swift exits even in total darkness or heavy smoke. Despite these efforts, it wasn't uncommon for a Sherman to brew up so quickly that escape was impossible. Interestingly, a U.S. Army study from 1944–1945 revealed that approximately one crew member died for every knocked-out Sherman. In contrast, Soviet T-34 tanks with 4 crew members experienced a fatality rate of 2 tankers per disabled tank, double that of the Sherman. But beyond the immediate crew fatalities, what happened to the remains inside a hit tank and who had the grim task of dealing with them. When people think of WWI's deadliest tank killers, the German big cats, tigers and panthers, often come to mind, celebrated in movies for decimating Allied armor while shells seemingly bounced off their formidable hides. However, for all sides, the true tank killers were overwhelmingly anti-tank guns and mines. For the Sherman, its earliest significant threat was the German 50mm Pak 38 anti-tank gun, also fitted to upgraded Panzer cutters, replacing their earlier, quickly outdated 37mm guns. The Pak 38 could readily disable a Sherman. As Sherman frontal armor improved, this became harder, leading Germany to introduce the 70mm Pak 40 anti-tank gun, a weapon that terrorized Allied tank crews throughout the war. This potent gun, with its incredibly high muzzle velocity, was also adapted and mounted on the Panzer IV, replacing its less powerful short-barreled howitzer. And then, of course, there was the infamous 88 Bunner flak gun. Originally designed for anti-aircraft defense, it quickly earned a reputation as an anti-everything weapon, proving incredibly effective. German tank guns were also inherently deadlier due to their ammunition. While Allied forces primarily relied on solid shot armor, piercing rounds, designed to punch through armor by sheer kinetic force and energy, the Germans utilized rounds with explosive fillers. This involved a small, delayed action explosive charge that detonated milliseconds after penetrating the armor. So, if a high-velocity armor piercing round tearing through your tank wasn't bad enough, imagine adding what was essentially a hand grenade exploding inside after penetration. This secondary explosion far more easily ignited fuel and ammunition, making it exceptionally dangerous for crew health. Then came infantry anti-tank weapons, which Germany fielded in abundance late in the war. Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks could turn a Sherman into a blazing inferno with a single hit, proving particularly lethal in urban combat. The impact on crews from these weapons was arguably even worse than from anti-tank guns. Their shaped charge warheads, upon striking the Sherman's armor, would detonate, creating a superheated jet of molten metal. This jet would melt through the steel and spray molten fragments throughout the tank's interior, showering the crew, fuel, and ammunition, an absolutely horrific way for a Sherman crewman to start their day. These weapons caused more crew fatalities per hit tank than even dedicated anti-tank guns. Consequently, it became common to see Shermans adorned with improvised, plique armor, logs, sandbags, concrete, anything crews could scrounge, to try and prematurely detonate these shaped charges away from the main armor, thereby reducing their impact. However, against armor-piercing anti-tank gun rounds, these makeshift protections offered little to no benefit. Then there were mines. Beyond standard anti-tank mines, which typically caused a mobility kill, by destroying a tank's tracks, they were sometimes converted into far more deadly traps. Consider this overturned Sherman. It struck an anti-tank mine on Okinawa, likely wired to a buried 500-pound bomb. The ensuing explosion hurled the 30-ton tank into the air, flipping it completely. It's a tragic video. You can see the lone surviving crew member, realizing his comrades wouldn't be emerging from the burning wreck. While understanding the mechanics of these anti-tank weapons and their gruesome effects on the human body is possible, it's perhaps better left unimagined. However, one notable characteristic of the Sherman was its remarkable reparability. Even after being knocked out in battle, it could often be recovered, repaired, and returned to action relatively quickly. But this often meant someone had the grim duty of entering a damaged Sherman to retrieve its crew, or what little remained of them. Sometimes, it was mechanics, other times, it was the dedicated Graves registration units, whose solemn mission was to recover and identify friendly casualties from the battlefield. I must choose my words carefully here, respecting YouTube's guidelines against graphic content. If a Sherman's fuel and ammunition ignited, leading to a complete burnout, the remains inside were often reduced to charcoal, barely recognizable as human. If the tank didn't burn, crews might find horrific, jelly-like remains splattered throughout the interior. These grisly residues had to be hosed out, and the interior repainted to erase any visible traces of the tragedy, allowing the tank to be readied for its next crew. Depending on the extent of the damage, the Sherman would either be cannibalized for spare parts or have its penetrating holes welded shut and given a new lease of life. This cycle extended to the crews themselves. During intense battles, survivors from knocked-out Shermans would often form new, makeshift crews to immediately man the next available tank and return to the fight. Some even survived multiple hits in different Shermans within a single battle. If your curiosity compels you to seek out the graphic realities I've hinted at, you can find such videos online. I've encountered several myself, but I genuinely advise against it. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen.